As I sat at my conference table basking in the success of having won board support the day before for a new strategy to transform Sears back to our glory days, I was jolted out of my self-congratulatory daydream when one of my direct reports poked his head into my office. John had played an essential role in the competitive and customer analysis that supported our recommendation. He looked dismayed. "What's up?" I queried. "I've been reflecting on the strategy we came up with," he began. "I think it really is the best we can do given the circumstances. But the more I think about it, it isn't really a strategy to win. It's just a strategy to suck less."
Welcome to a special Remarkable Retail Podcast Summer Series focused on what leaders need to do to help their organizations win the future and leap to higher ground. I'm Michael LeBlanc, and in this 6-part limited series, Steve will be unpacking key lessons from his new best-selling book, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, available everywhere books are sold.
It's a crisp fall day in 2002, and I'm enjoying my second cup of coffee in my office at Sears' sprawling corporate campus outside of Chicago. The last 18 months have been exhausting for me and my team, but on this particular morning, I'm feeling pretty good. The previous afternoon, we had presented our long-term transformation plan to the Sears Board of Directors. Our recommendations were thorough and expansive, but we knew we might face resistance. Putting our plans into action would require billions of dollars in investment and many complicated and painful changes. If successful, and there were hardly any guarantees, it would take years to fully realize the benefits. To move from design and testing into comprehensive action, we needed the board's full-throated assent, and we got it. They were ready, they said, to do what had to be done. They would invest real money to recapture Sears' promise and reboot the storied retailer, positioning it for a better future. From a personal perspective, this felt like a huge achievement. The previous year, I had been promoted to Vice President of Corporate Strategy and joined the company's senior leadership team. I had several responsibilities, but by far the most important and vexing one was helping craft a turnaround strategy for Sears' long-suffering department store business. Although Sears had once been the biggest, most valuable retailer on the planet, as you probably know, for more than a decade, the company's retail market share, competitive situation, and financial performance had declined dramatically. The blows were coming from all sides and had been for many years. Discount mass merchants like Walmart, Target, and Kohl's were stealing away more value and convenience-oriented customers. So-called category killers like Home Depot and Lowe's in home improvement, and Best Buy in appliances and consumer electronics had become formidable, rapidly expanding competitors. They were starting to erode Sears' once overwhelmingly dominant and highly profitable market position. Our situation was growing increasingly dire. This wasn't Sears' first attempt at a turnaround. Far from it. Multiple past leadership regimes had tried to return Sears to its glory days. They'd done some innovative things, including launching the high-profile Softer Side of Sears campaign in the mid-1990s, and following that quickly with an early and quite substantial investment in e-commerce. Numerous specialty concepts that were not tethered to regional mall real estate had been piloted and expanded to varying degrees of success. Still, none were stemming what increasingly looked like a potential slow slide into oblivion for what was the first, and at the time, most famous everything store. In late 2000, Alan Lacey was named Sears' new CEO. He moved quickly to assemble a new leadership team, eventually appointing me to head up corporate strategy. Once again, it was time to mount an attempt at a bold turnaround. So we dug into customer data and conducted extensive competitive analysis. With the assistance of a prominent strategy consulting firm, we executed many rounds of consumer research to understand what was most critical to the customers we desperately needed to win, grow, and retain. As we got further into the process and learned much more about our opportunities and our weaknesses, we began piloting multiple tracks across the company to experiment with new strategies. We consolidated and developed new private brands, created new marketing campaigns, and explored a comprehensive redesign of our store operating model, layout, and visual merchandising. All were aimed at dramatically improving customer relevance and driving greater profitability. we were on to something big, or so we thought. It wasn't all analysis and experimentation. A few months before we presented our longer-term vision, we'd written a check for nearly $2 billion to acquire Land's End, with the aim of enhancing our apparel and home businesses and accelerating our growing e-commerce and direct-to-consumer capabilities. A new big-box off-the-mall concept called Sears Grand was being designed completely from the ground up and would open up the next year. It was an ambitious agenda, and my team had played an indispensable role. And now we have the board's support to scale up our experiments and roll out the complete turnaround strategy. We'd done just about everything we had originally set out to accomplish when I started in my new position. Having worked in strategy and innovation for the better part of my career, I knew that pitching such an ambitious plan is not usually so successful, no matter how necessary one's efforts might be. But back to that fateful fall day. As I sat at my conference table basking in our success, I was suddenly jolted out of my self-congratulatory daydream when one of my direct reports poked his head into my office. John had played an essential role in the competitive and customer analysis, and he was also helping lead the development of our new concept store. He looked dismayed. "What's up?" I queried.
Steve, I've been reflecting on the strategy we came up with, and I definitely think it really is the best we can do given the circumstances. But, the more I think about it, it isn't really a strategy to win. It's just a strategy to suck less.
I was perplexed. What was he talking about? Did he not remember all the fantastic work we had just completed? Did he not appreciate how hard it was to get the executive team's alignment and ultimately secure the board's support? We'd nailed this thing. We were going to be the savior of Sears. But then, slowly at first, and then all at once, a sinking feeling started to consume me. Questions I had repressed or denied began to fill my head. Even if everything we had planned was flawlessly executed, were our actions bold enough to meaningfully differentiate ourselves from the competition? Could we possibly move fast enough to close the gap that had developed and widened because of our slowness to act for so very many years? Fundamentally, were we actually leaping to a new leadership position or essentially running to stand still? My veil of denial began to part. Shit. John was right. That's an excerpt from the introduction of my new book, Leaders Leap. By now, most listeners probably know that Sears went from being the most powerful retail brand in the world in 1990 to essentially a non-entity today. When I left the company in the fall of 2003, about a year after that fateful presentation, I knew things would end badly for the storied brand. As a former boss of mine said, and I'm paraphrasing, "We all know how this movie ends. We just don't know how many minutes are left." Of course, Sears is hardly alone. The rise and fall of once powerful and iconic brands is, sadly, all too familiar inside and outside of retail. Bed Bath & Beyond, Blockbuster, Borders, Pier 1, Radio Shack, as well as AOL, BlackBerry, Compaq, Gateway, Nokia, Palm, Oldsmobile, Saturn, and many more. Today, other brands seem to be engaged in an endless cycle of struggle, whether we are talking about department stores, which are now into more than 2 decades of decline, or just about every traditional media company. And it's not like most of these companies don't realize that they are in trouble. New strategies get launched to much fanfare. For example, just a few months ago, Macy's announced a bold new chapter. Transformation offices, often headed by a chief transformation officer, are becoming commonplace. Even Allbirds, a digitally native vertical brand that is a mere 10 years old, announced such an effort recently. And of course, many millions of dollars get spent on big consulting firms to find a new way forward. Even outside of obviously troubled organizations, there's a great deal of concern and sometimes abject fear about the pace of disruption and their ability to address it. According to AlixPartners' 2023 disruption study, 78% of CEOs surveyed indicated their companies faced serious disruption in the past year, up 10% from the year earlier. 98% say their business model must change in the next 3 years, but 85% say they find it hard to know where to start. 65% say technology is changing at a rate that they can't keep up with. And yet, according to McKinsey, some 70% of all transformation programs fail. It's worth asking, what's going on here? Of course, the reasons for this are often complicated and varied, but the most common theme is that companies experience the curse of the timid transformation. At a time when what is needed is a radical rethink of a failing business model that will actually drive the business forward at the speed of disruption, they instead focus on creating a faster horse. As they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, half measures avail us nothing. Moreover, in a world where the pace of change is only accelerating, often becoming more exponential than linear, failure to transform at the speed of disruption only creates the likelihood that you will fall further and further behind. Minding this potential gap is critical. For struggling organizations, failure to close it by aiming higher, moving faster, and acting more boldly may mean they fall so far behind that they can never catch up. But even organizations that are performing well can find themselves in trouble if they don't pay attention and let go of merely delivering incremental changes. This pattern of focusing on simply sucking less at worst, or a relentless stream of optimization at best, and exposing one's organization to disruption is not new. In his classic book from the 90s, legendary HBS professor Clayton Christensen labeled this as the innovator's dilemma. And the forces that keep legacy brands stuck are still very much in play today. But the challenge to truly transform in the face of disruption is much greater. And the penalty for merely closing a competitive gap rather than leaping boldly ahead has become much greater. In a world where anything less than delivering highly differentiated and truly remarkable customer value is often ignored, sucking less, merely closing the gap on competitive performance, what I often call innovating to parity, or just offering a slightly better version of mediocre, is choosing to move into a zone of irrelevance, or perhaps even putting your organization on the path to outright extinction. In this 6-part summer series, we will explore why we must choose remarkable or risk irrelevance. We will go deep on unpacking the root causes that lead to an overly timid transformation. We will delve into what is required to lead in the face of relentless, unyielding disruption. This rigorous examination will often take us into challenging territory, to places where, as transformational leaders or those that desire to become one, we must take a hard look in the mirror. But change is possible if we are willing to look at our own biases, open the aperture on what is possible, do the courageous work, and in the face of all the challenges, make a bold leap. Ultimately, while as retired U.S. General Eric Shinseki said, if you dislike change, you are going to dislike irrelevance even more, this is a message of hope. To illustrate this point, I love a billboard that Netflix posted on a Hollywood street a couple of years back. It said, "Don't give up on your dreams. We started with DVDs." During each of the half-dozen episodes in this special series, I will conclude with 3 or 4 questions to both help bring some of the material to life, as well as to help you think about how to apply these concepts to your organization and its unique situation. So here are this week's queries. Number 1, do you have a clear sense of whether you are aiming high enough in the value you are delivering to your customers to generate the degree of new customer activity, profitable growth with existing customers, retention of current customers, and to drive above average net promoter scores or similar measure of remarkability? Number 2, if not, why not? Number 3, do you have alignment on the speed of disruption for your competitive sector? Are you staying at the leading edge? And number 4, would you describe your innovation strategy as primarily focused on incremental improvement or on taking leaps to be truly remarkable over the longer term? I hope you'll discuss these questions with your teams to see what new ideas or perspectives might emerge. We'll be back next week to dive into some of the most important shifts that are driving the need to accelerate our transformational journey.
You've been listening to a special Summer Leaders Leap bonus edition of the Remarkable Retail Podcast, hosted by Steve Dennis and produced by me, Michael LeBlanc. Season 9 of the Remarkable Retail Podcast returns in its usual format on September 10th. Follow us wherever you enjoy your podcast, and don't forget to drop us that 5-star review. Safe travels, everyone.